Te Dakota Te Wharo o Auckland Unitarians. Te Dakota Ngā Manahiri, no bai, higher by ki tene whare karakia a te atua. Te Dakota te natata katoa. We welcome you into this circle of community. Welcome into the space made sacred by Auckland Unitarians for 115 years. We especially welcome you if you are a visitor just passing through or seeking a spiritual home. As we probably all know, it is the day before early voting begins. For New Zealand, it has been an extraordinary campaign, but now it is time to wrap it up. Some will be elated by the results, and others will feel dejected. But regardless of who wins or loses, our world will still be broken and suffering from ills that even government is powerless to cure. Our lives will still be chaotic and in need of tranquility. Grief and loss will continue to haunt us. We will still face the challenge of finding meaning and a faith that can sustain us through tough times. I don't have to tell Unitarians that voting is important, but there are many other ways in which we can exercise power in our own lives and influence the world for the better. Self-government, after all, begins at home, with how I treat my neighbor, relate to my family, care for my community, and how I work and play. Hope for the future depends less on who gets elected than on our ability to exercise our own power for good. This morning, I welcome members of our congregation who have agreed to share their reflections on the election. Viv Allen, Jonathan Mason, Kurt Payne, Henri van Roon, and Steff Werman reflect a wide spectrum within our congregation. Here in Middle-earth, Frodo once asked Sam, "What are we holding on to, Sam?" Sam answered, "That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for." We light our chalice to guide us to vote for the good in this world.
So I guess the things that really weigh really heavily on my mind are, I guess, issues around the environment and addressing climate change and our environmental pollution in New Zealand, and how that is really interrelated with how we take guardianship of the planet and also guardianship and leadership in our communities to address social inequality. For me, those issues are very tightly linked. So I can't really separate out the environmental issues from the social issues. So those are my my main concerns. And also, I'm kind of ready for us as a country to grab the opportunities that these really difficult issues present and really run with them and be world leaders in getting on top of some of our tricky problems.
Okay, Jonathan Mason. So studying history right now and also studied economics before. So my comments are going to include some history and economics. So economists would tell you that all these different social issues don't determine elections. economics determines elections. And they're right, in my opinion, they're right about 80% of the time. So what economists say is you could take 3 or 4 variables, like how high the unemployment rate is, has disposable income gone up, overall rate of GDP growth, and that'll determine whether the incumbent party wins or whether there's a change of government. And I'll come back to that. There is, though, one history. If you look historically, in most democracies, and New Zealand would fit this pattern, it is very hard to survive as an incumbent party more than 9 years. So in the last 130 years, there's been only 3 incumbent parties that have gone for more than 9 years. That's Richard Seddon in the Reform Party back in the 1890s, Massey in the 20s, and Holyoke in the 60s. All other parties have been changed out. Why is that? Because voters like change after a while. And so you have, so the election in a nutshell from an economist's viewpoint is how important is the top line, growth, in the economist, because by that, I'll explain why, nationals should be reelected, and how important is change. So when I look at the election coming from both an economist and history, the last 5 years is the best for economic growth in 30 years relative to other OECD countries. We've had a really rough time, New Zealand, since really the mid-70s. So to give you some color, from 1945 to 1960, we were the top performing economy in the OECD. We grew 7.5% a year between 1945 and 1960. Think about that. So we're great now relative to other countries, growing 2.7% a year. So that doesn't sound great, but now let's look at the contrast. Australia is 2.6%. US is 1.8%. UK is 1.1%. And Japan is 0.4%. So what national party's running on is we've grown the pie. We've grown the overall economy better. We've done a magnificent job of managing the global financial crisis. The issue is, and think of the historical view of change, is when you get below the overall rate of growth, and specifically sitting here in Auckland, housing affordability, environmental degradation, child poverty, overall poverty. How are people going to make it? There's sort of an undercurrent of unease, and nationals picked up on it and is trying to put some programs in to try to say, hey, we're not just looking at the top line. So, so what I see the election about is the growth of the top line versus how good are we as a society beneath that. But I think it's likely that there will be a change of government, looking at the polls now. And the thing to watch is, though, when Labor, if there's a Labor coalition that gets in, the right wing of Labor will be concerned about growth of the pie, because they'll know the economists' view. If unemployment ends up at 6% 3 years from now, it's unlikely they'll be reelected. So it's all, the reason sometimes we have center politics is both parties are a bit concerned about both. Labor will look more at the underlying levels. National look at the top level. The issue that resonates most for me is, again, the environment. Really disappointed in our performance. I guess I used to work for Fonterra, so I'm part of that. But we're one of the 4 worst economies in the world on per capita emissions. We are worse than the U.S. We are worse than the U.S. I can remember 3 out of the 4 economies, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. and 50% of our emissions are agriculture, and we don't have a comprehensive plan to limit agricultural emissions, and there's some reasonably easy things we can do. And the criticism I'd have is what I think John Key would say privately is I am a bit worried about the economy. But I say John Key rather than Bill English because he was the past prime minister. Why haven't they done more in the 9 years? I am concerned about the environment, but New Zealand can't make a difference. And the flip side that I'd say is we can make a difference by being a leader. We can be a difference by being a model to other countries. And if you go back 120 years, we were a model. We were the social laboratory of the world. First country to give women suffrage. First country to have old age pensions. We no longer have that aspiration, and we should. Okay, so one last thing. Has anyone gone on the website, Vote Compass, New Zealand? Okay, yeah, really good website. For all the others who haven't, about 300,000 New Zealanders have gone on. But what it does is you answer different questions. Maybe it's a dozen questions. And then it'll give you a map of how your opinions compare to all the different parties. And so it'll really show you in stark relief, because often in democracies, we vote on personalities over policies. I mean, to cite one statistic, a third of the voters who voted for Trump thought he was more liberal than Hillary Clinton was, when clearly, I mean, in retrospect, a lot more conservative. So what Vote Compass has been set up to do is to try to get away from the personalities and say, what do you believe? And here's how your opinions compare to all the parties out there. Okay, so I'd encourage all of you to go on Vote Compass, because it could be an eye-opener on where your opinions are. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Jonathan. I found that really interesting. I'm Viv Allen, and I probably have a different perspective. I actually think both parties, the Labour coalition or National, actually can keep the economy going. I think they've both proven in many years that they can do that. So I'm ignoring that part of things, and I'm going to focus on the inequality that has increased in our society, and has happened by stealth. So often I'm quite horrified when I talk to people who don't actually haven't noticed it, because it has happened over so many years. And that is one of the reasons I see as the main reason that affects our housing affordability. It affects the poverty the increase in poverty. It has created that increase in poverty. And I think that when you're considering your vote, I'd like to think that you look at whatever choice in the whole sphere of decreasing that inequality. Now, inequality, when I talk to people, some people say, oh, communism, you mean to think that everyone should earn the same and they should all have there's always going to be people that don't, they squander their money, and that is not what I mean. That is not what I mean at all. We want a level playing field for all children. At the moment, housing, you happen to get rich because you own a house. That is so unfair. And also, people who have capital, meaning money or ability to borrow money, are able to buy more houses and make more money. Total inequality. So please, when you're thinking of your vote this year, have a little thought about how we can reduce inequality, and there's many different ways, by tweaking with the housing, maybe capital gains tax, possibly a higher tax on higher wealth, or maybe a wealth tax. There's all different options from the different parties, so have a think about that, please.
Hi, my name is Henri van Roon. I have a background in geography, planning, and financial planning, and I'm a pessimist at the moment. Did people hear me, or did I lose it? Yep. I'm pessimistic The only party that I feel is putting policies first is TOP, and I don't think they're going to get into power. Having said that, they are raising the level of debate by putting issues on the table and quantifiable or justifying particular policies and objectives in the hope that other parties will pick them up. To date, that seems to be working, but when I go to political meetings, I see the same old faces, the same old issues. And if I look closely at where things are going, and I appreciate what Jonathan has said, I see the overarching issue, one, of being that we are still not recognizing that humanity is part of an ecosystem. The economy is a subset. The economy is not the driver. If we don't have an ecological foundation, we're stuffed. And we're well on the way to being stuffed. Climate change is the overarching issue that we need to address, and neither party is really strong on it. Labour talks about it, but it's lip service from my perspective. We've had 9 years of national, and like Jonathan, I think it's time for a change that will actually start to address the underlying issues of climate change. The second issue to me is also equity, which Vivian has talked about. Yes, the economy has grown, the pie is bigger, but the share that's going to the 1% is very much bigger. And the bottom 50% of New Zealanders have almost no equity, no stake in the business. And that's socially disruptive and ultimately will bite all of us. So looking at what the parties are saying, the Greens are looking comprehensively at climate change, maybe idealistic, but it's on the table. TOP's the same. Labour is still, from my perspective, bleating on about improving the emissions trading scheme, which I've had quite a bit to do with. The reality is it's been mismanaged by both parties. We can make it work, but it will need a lot of help. Equity, I'm firmly in the field where Gareth Morgan is pushing for universal basic income, and I can talk at length about that. It's sharing the resources that we have and putting in a fair tax system. I could go on, but enough.
Good morning, my name's Kurt, and it's been really exciting listening to everyone, and I think I agree with what everyone said so far, which is awesome. Something that Henri raised was effective opposition, which I have felt for the last few years especially, there hasn't been effective opposition. We just had all these seats in Parliament just wasted because it's just like fighting against a wet flannel. There hasn't actually been robust debate about issues in Parliament. What's been on my mind this year, or actually in the last month a lot, is looking at our guiding principles, and our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And there's been talk in the UUA about having that change to the inherent worth and dignity of every being. And that's made me think about my single vote isn't actually just for me, it's for every person or thing that can't vote. So every person that's disenfranchised or too young or can't make it to the polling booth or has had their arm twisted to vote for something they don't believe in, for our mountains, for our rivers, for the oceans, for the animals, for every single thing that being that is in New Zealand, I am voting for. So it is actually bigger than I would have thought at the beginning of the year. I've had two other concerns this year as well, or actually just in the last few weeks, about how the parties are doing vote buying rather than building vision. And it's quite, I don't know, it really gets up my back that, you know, we have no idea what parties have been standing for the last 3 years. All of a sudden, all these policies and stuff are coming, and it's like, yeah, what? why haven't we been talking about this? The other thing that has been concerning me is these leaders that have been in our parties for many, many years. We find out all their skeletons in their closet just now at election time. These people are representing our country, they're representing us. Why do we not know who they are? And, whatever's happened with their lives, we all make mistakes, we all do things. They all come out in this last week. It's scary. My thoughts on immigration are, for the economy, if we bring a productive person from overseas who's of working age and skilled, they can add value to our economy. That's cheaper than raising one from birth. The other thing is, other point I have is that a lot of things that are problems in New Zealand, such as housing, we actually have to look at, why is Auckland expensive? Because a lot of people are either migrating here from other parts of the country or from overseas. That's inflating, creating demand, and there's no supply. So it's not looking at the single issue of immigration, it's looking at multiple issues of, healthcare, housing.
Do it first. I'm a migrant. I did my master's thesis on migration. I think we should control migration to our collective benefit. At the moment, we import skills and we don't train our own. And that ranges from medical, 43% or more of our doctors are foreign born or foreign trained. Not a good scheme. The same with construction. Post-Christchurch earthquake, I would have thought the first thing we would do is set up training plans for the building construction industry. It didn't happen. At the moment, we are getting large numbers of migrants. I'm uncertain, in fact, probably sure that overall the quality of our life is dropping as a result of migration. Having said that, we are likely to face massive migration as a result of climate change refugees. And I'm very uncomfortable about how we will cope. We bleat about adding an extra 500 refugees to our quota. We're talking really of millions having to move. What are we going to do?
I went to the home show the other day and got talking to a couple of guys, immigrants. And last year I saw them at the home show and they'd created these mirrors which got lights in them and heating. And this year I talked to them again and they'd taken feedback and they've increased they're all made, they've set up a factory. I'm really impressed with a lot of these entrepreneurial immigrants that we get, and I think I'd like to continue. But it's controlling them. It's bringing in people like that. They don't necessarily have money, but they're go-getters, and they're going to, keep us on our toes. What I don't like is bringing a lot of immigrants in of low-skilled that I've got a feeling might keep our wages down because they're filling those jobs.
I'd make the comments that others did. The other comment I'd make is a fear that immigration is distorting housing values, if that makes sense. So what I'm seeing in Remuera, these are expensive properties. Asians buying and not even moving in. They're just using it as an investment. Okay. I hate to call out groups, but what you see in multiple Pacific Rim cities is rich Asians buying houses to just store value. And so what I see in Remuera now is more and more houses, no one's living in them. They're bought as a store of value. They call it a bolt hole, is another term. If things really go badly, in an Asian economy. And so this has led to New Zealand having the worst debt-to-income ratio of any country in the OECD. We're about 10 to 1, which is why housing is unaffordable here. Now, why haven't we done anything about it? Because there's sellers of houses who really like the high housing prices. And National has gone along with it and has not woken up quickly enough on this issue, in my opinion. So, and I agree with the other comments made too. By the way, here's just one comment on migration, is I do have some sympathy for whoever is in the government. Millions of people want to migrate here, and so how do you allocate? And there's been a couple things we've mentioned here. One, entrepreneurs. You want like people who are vibrant, dynamic. Two, refugees, like Syria's terrible. You know, how could we not help out Syria and other countries who are going through terrible things? Now, you talk to growers, you talk to infrastructure companies. They say we can't do projects without. I do sympathize with Viv's point. Hold it, wouldn't that just mean we ratchet up the wages of New Zealanders who are here? But if you talk to the leaders of the kiwi fruit or dairy or like infrastructure projects within Auckland, they say they will not get done without migrant help. They will not get done. And I don't know who to believe on that, but I'll just mention it is very hard to allocate immigration with so many people wanting to get in.
Thanks everyone for your thoughts on it. I think you've all made really excellent points, and it's a really tricky issue from a policy perspective. But for me, when I hear the different parties talking about immigration, the thing that concerns me most is not the discussion at a policy level, but how the wider community takes that on in terms of scapegoating immigrants. I think that often even when people are reflecting on the comments from the different political leaders, they sort of miss the nuance in the conversation, and some of the things I overhear in my day-to-day are just very disappointing, very a lot of xenophobia and that kind of thing. I work up at the University of Auckland, and something else that I see a lot of are these migrants who come over, and they are highly educated. They do have training and skills that they bring, and I'm concerned about the way that they end up in really low-paid contract work, and they're taken advantage of. I know that up at the university we contract out for our cleaning and for our security, and the night staff for the past 5 to 10 years that I've seen have really been people who are here. They've just come over here. They're working these low-paid jobs, and they have skills, and they could be contributing a lot more. And I see it in their frustration. I see it in that they're very easy to take advantage of on a systemic level. And I see the kind of work they're forced into, working all night for minimum wage, sleeping all day. It reduces their opportunity to get embedded in the community and really be seen. So they're sort of marginalised in that. Their visibility is reduced as well. So yeah, for me, scapegoating and the once migrants come into the country, what kind of work and opportunities are we giving them, and is that fair? I'm an immigrant as well. Came over here when I was a young kid, and it's one of my favourite things about our community is how diverse it is, and I hope that people can have a wider conversation to see the value of people outside of what's happening in housing, or which insert xenophobic flavour are taking away our jobs here. I don't have particular expertise or knowledge in that area, but I know I have a lot of friends who work in nursing or in the medical industry, in the medical sector, and all I know is that they're not funded well enough for them to do their jobs, and they're really worried and feeling, again, kind of disengaged in their work because it's becoming such a struggle for them. But I'm sure others will have more knowledge about the funding of the DHB side of things. So,
I mean, I think that's a secondary issue, but it's a bad sign that so many are running budget deficits. And I do understand two megatrends is, as we get older, we need more health care. What's happening to society? We're getting older. Baby boomers are retiring. Second, medical technology, medical treatments are getting more expensive. They're better. I mean, I went to a cancer talk 2 weeks ago. Wow, there are some neat treatments out there now. The problem is they're more expensive. And so what I fear is the government, because it's a secondary issue. Why is it a secondary issue? Because not everyone's affected by it. So only a minority of people are affected by it. So the government sort of capped the growth of funds, and there's more demand than supply of funds. So then DHBs go into deficits. Have you heard multiple DHBs are in material deficits? So.
Because I know nothing about the DHBs, the only thing about health that upsets me in New Zealand is that we don't have dental care for those that can't afford it. My dentist tells me that your dental health can affect your heart, and there are a whole lot of diseases from not getting dental care that is really causing a lot of problems. I still pay for my 33-year-old to go to the dentist because she's on an average wage and can, at $800 a week rent, okay, it's shared, but she can't afford it. And I paid for my 40-year-old daughter until she was about 35. Not many people can do that. And I see the evidence out there of people not being able to go to maybe a job interview because they feel that they don't present themselves. That is another show of inequality in our society.
I can only echo what the previous speakers have said, but observe two things. We've got an aging population, and roughly 80% of what an individual incurs in medical costs happens after the age of 70. 80%. Secondly, the insurance industry here, and I'm thinking of outfits like Southern Cross, provide for the well-to-do, those that can afford it. So some of the issues that need to be addressed at the DHB funding level are sidestepped because those who have a way out. They're not affected to the same extent. If I need surgery, if I have insurance, I can get the surgery done instantly. Otherwise, you go on a waiting list for a hip replacement for 10, 12, 15 months or longer. So until we address the issue of equal access to medical care, and I'm talking here about actually doing away with the health insurance industry as we know it, until that is done, I think we're going to face ongoing strife.
I've looked a little bit into how healthcare is funded around the world. And one of the curious things is every single country spends the same percentage of their GDP on healthcare. So if you... Except USA. So if you consider New Zealand, a small island in the Pacific Ocean, relatively under-resourced, we're spending the same percentage as other countries in the world. So it's just how that money is allocated. So one thing we could do is increase GDPs. That's another separate conversation. how we spend our money, we have the option to spend it on the latest fancy machineries and treatments, or to give universal preventative health care. So I'll give a good example. If you have 2 cataracts, you can get one eye treated, the other eye won't be treated. And the surgery costs, I think it used to be about $2,000 per eye, it's probably about $5,000. It's relatively cheap. What we're having happen in our country, is people are going on a waiting list to have cataract surgery done or not having it done, and tripping on the stairs and breaking their hip, which is a lot more expensive thing to do to have surgery done on, or they're going on waiting list, which is even more expensive. It's how we allocate that funding is quite different to where whether that money is increased or not. I'm the white privileged male. The treaty is between the royal family and the people of New Zealand. So the parties that are pushing for a republic might have a fun time.
I've got no specific comments to add apart from the fact that both major parties are still talking about treaty settlements being complete and final. I think it's 2019 for National and 2020 for Labour. The reality, I think, is going to drag out, and I don't see a clear way ahead to settle these issues except to address the economic and environmental issues as part of it.
I'm very proud of the fact that New Zealand has opened the discussion and doing the treaty settlements, how, albeit they're only a minor recompensation, I'm horrified by 2 things I find in the community. One is white New Zealanders, white Kiwi New Zealanders, totally against the fact of paying any money back. And the other one, it worries me intensely, is I've never met an immigrant yet who agrees with the treaty settlements, because they say, well, they just don't understand it. And I find that a real worry, because I think there's still a lot more that we could do to recompense the Maori for what my ancestors did, because I'm a 5th, 6th generation, and I'm sure some of them, they were into a lot of things of getting land off the Maori.
Can I do an adjacent answer? Yeah. I have a microphone. I can do anything I want. Okay. Okay, so I've been studying New Zealand history this term. And Tainui, from about Auckland Airport down to the Bombay Hills, say Pocono, during the New Zealand land wars, they were already economically integrated into the Auckland economy. They provided vegetables, grain to the Auckland economy. And in that period, from 1840, Treaty of Waitangi, to 1863, if you went to your average Tainui and said, are you happy that the Europeans came? They'd say, we didn't know so many were coming, but we're happy. Because trade has provided us with a better life. And so their vision was to a win-win, sort of integrate into the economy, keep their own land. And when the land war started in 1863, this whole group was given 2 days to do one of 2 things: either swear an oath of loyalty to the crown and fight against their family, or they were evicted. They lost their land, lost their house. 2 days. And over 90%, over 95% would not fight their family, and they lost their houses. And they never got them back. Okay? So when you study the detail, and if you ever meet anyone who says the Maori deserve nothing, at least look at the historical detail. There's an excellent, it's unfortunately a big book, but Vincent O'Malley's The Great New Zealand War goes into a lot of detail. He'll have his own narrative, but there are facts in there that, you know, sort of go beyond a particular narrative. So,
Yeah, I think Te Tiriti is such an important part of our history, and I think I'm also disheartened when I hear sort of Pākehā New Zealanders saying this is unimportant or we can disregard this now, because even at the point where if the settlements could all be concluded, even at that point for me, the document is such an important part of our history, and it has a life to it. It has it's a great document of kind of understanding between Māori and Pākehā worldviews, and there's quite a disconnect there. I think it's really important that we roll more comprehensive treaty education and the history of our colonialism in New Zealand into education at primary, secondary, and tertiary level. But also, you're right, Viv, we don't do very much to have that conversation. It's quite tokenistic how the conversation happens at school level. At least it was when I was in school. And I think that we need to be able to extend that to older New Zealanders and people who've just come here and don't have that depth of understanding. So yeah, I think education is important so that we can be talking about the same things in it, because it has a lot of value in bridging that cultural gap.
Very short answer. My family have had wider extended family, 2 suicides and 2 attempted suicides. 3 suicides, I've just remembered the third. Unfortunately, the topic to me is just so big and so overwhelming, and because my knowledge is so little, I'm having trouble. No, it's not going to influence me because I don't know if throwing money at it will work. I don't know. So if a politician says I'm going to throw some money at it, well, is that going to work? Or another politician says I'm going to create this ministry, is that going to work? I think maybe it needs a multi-party solution.
I'd echo that, and I'd say a lot of the issues with suicide come back to economic alienation. If we can get the economy right, then I think the issue will fall in importance. It's not an easy and not a short-term solution. But when you look at suicide rates around the world, New Zealand stands out by a long shot. And I think in part that reflects the changes in the last 30 years. Because I know that in the 50s and 60s, suicide was not an issue. Yes, it occurred, but it was not what we've got today.
I think the rules around the reporting of suicides needs some review or change. I also, the people I know affected by mental health issues also feel disenfranchised to vote. So if you are voting, you're voting for them.
Yes, mental health is a really important issue for me and for my my community up at the university. When I think about how it impacts my vote, it's whether or not the politicians are even talking about it, whether they're acknowledging the reality of our situation. So I think, yes, there's an economic aspect to our mental health crisis, but I think it's also a reflection of that inequality, and particularly intergenerational inequality. We're seeing at the university far escalating rates of depression, of anxiety, and A lot of that's tied to student debt, escalating living costs, and we're seeing a lot more suicides and suicide attempts, both on campus and just in our student body off campus. I think there's the inequality, there's the hopelessness that, I mean, I'm nearly 30, and oh, your scarf's about to go up. So I think it's that I know I find it really challenging looking at our opportunity that my generation has with fixed-term contracts, the casualisation of the workforce, huge debt, and a sense of hopelessness with the environmental problems that we're facing and the lack of cross-party conversation on the issue. But I also think it has to do with the Kiwi culture. I think that we kind of take the stiff upper lip thing a bit too far, coming from a sort of an American social background. I find that Americans are often a lot more quick to open up and form a closer bond, and I think that's something that New Zealand culture could take away from our North American friends and find a way to have those meaningful connections and go beyond just, oh, she said she was fine, so I guess she's fine, I don't need to follow it up, but really have everybody individually can really reach out to people in their lives and make sure you're checking in with your friends if you haven't heard from them for a while, catch up in person. It can be hard for people my age to have the time outside of struggling to keep our head above water and work and actually get to build those that social safety net in your communities.
I'm going to, actually, we've surprising degree of agreement on suicide specifically, don't know mental health. I don't know that it's all inequality, not that anyone said it, but something sticks in my mind that the most equal societies in the OECD are in Scandinavia, also high suicide rates. So if you did a scatter chart and said degree of inequality, and another hypothesis I'd throw out is, and it sort of echoes your points, as good as we think we might be, New Zealand, teenagers can feel more out of place in New Zealand schools than in many other country schools. Now, why would that be? We're such a diverse, inclusive society, I think. But our teen suicide rate indicates that our teenagers go to a worse place than other countries. And I don't think it's just income inequality. There's something about our society that does that.
The fact is, mental health is...
I feel once you've left the public education system, whether you are able or want to work, whether you are volunteering for any organisation, whether you're bringing up children, whether you're doing anything in society, you should have a universal income of enough to live.
I agree. I think the idea of a universal basic income is a great idea. I've read Gareth Morgan's book, but I think we need a lot more discussion. You can't just bring something in like that overnight, and you need to bring the population with you or do some trials somewhere.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see UBI trials in New Zealand. Also, for those people who are in that situation and they're unable to work, I think a cultural shift could help there as well, and maybe a policy shift, and just honouring the volunteer work that people who can't do paid employment for one reason or another, their contribution to our society, is rewarded, is just appreciated and acknowledged and quantified, rather than seeing them as, oh, they're not making money, producing money, it's not good enough.
I want to thank our panel for my closing words. I walk in as on pilgrimage The altar cloths are red, white, and blue. The ushers are the women who have been running these things, who have been running everything since before I was born. I'm handed the ballot like a scroll because the questions seem that important, ancient and modern, of what my God and country ask of me. Who? Who will do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly? I make my mark with at least a shred of hope that something good will come from this. And regardless, I remember, the world won't be destroyed entirely by this. The world won't be saved entirely by this. Marking my vote is like kneeling in prayer, because neither will accomplish anything right away. But the purpose of both is to remind me of my deepest hope for the world that I'm trying to help create. So I rise from prayer and turn in my ballot and remember the who is me and us and we the people. And again, I set to the task that is mine: justice, mercy, humble service in my small corner of the world.